Hello and welcome to Chasing Leviathan. I'm your host, PJ Weary, and I find myself here today with Marisa Zalabak, a founder of Open Channel Culture. She is an educational psychologist, adaptive leadership coach, TEDx and keynote speaker, researcher, author, facilitator, and AI ethicist. As a coach and consultant for adaptive leadership and organizational culture, she focuses on human potential, sustainability, and essential skills for the emerging future. Marisa currently serves as a co-chair of a committee expanding global AI ethics education with IEEE.org, the world's largest professional organization advancing technology for humanity. She is a contributing author of IEEE's recommended standards for the ethical design of artificial intelligence, as well as a co-author of proposed approaches for transdisciplinary collaboration in the development and mobilization of ethical AI. She's a member of MIT's ULab with a Presencing Institute, co-creation innovation labs, building capacity in programs and action research worldwide to support societal innovation. And she also serves on multiple global leadership teams for the advancement of the UN Sustainable Developmental Goals and peacemaking. You can learn more about her work at openchannelculture.com, and she can be reached personally at mzalabak@openchannelculture.com. Marisa, thank you so much for coming on today.
Welcome. That was a lot to chew on, PJ.
That's fine. I love it. It really gives it. I mean, it's amazing the breadth of what you do. And so today, like, obviously, there's a lot we could talk about. And one of the things that when we had a kind of a pre-podcast phone call was what topic to discuss. But we kind of both came to the conclusion that what is most clear, for some reason, the title Clear and Present Danger kept coming up in my mind, but it's not necessarily a danger, right? But what are the clearest ethical dilemmas and problems that we are facing in the AI world today?
Well, there are a lot.
Yeah.
And one of the things I really want to keep, I remind myself as often as I can to keep circling back to, is that this is coming with something that is very exciting and wonderful, right? And when I first got involved, it's IEEE, by the way, which is just, I had no clue either.
That makes my life so much easier. IEEE. I think I said 4 E's the first time.
Right, but it's all good. It's all good. The thing is, I didn't know about it either because I'm not an engineer. It's an engineering organization. But
I have seen it before. Mm-hmm. I just never talked to anyone about it. But yes, go ahead.
Well, the thing is, what they are, it's a huge organization, right? It's the largest professional organization of engineers in the world.
Right.
The thing is that they do multiple things. And one of the things that I got recruited for and became part of was a committee developing recommended standards for the design of AI related to human well-being. So, for example, if I'm going to have a flying car, which has its benefits, right? I mean, we can talk about the downsides, right?
Yeah.
When I have its benefits, what are the ethical considerations that we have really taken and considered? What are the considerations? What are the legal ramifications? One of my favorite phrases when I began working on this stuff was intended and unintended users.
Right. Oh, users. Okay. That was not where I thought that was going, but yeah.
Intended and unintended users. So, recently we've had these situations with, I don't want to point out Tesla, but it's just an example. Recently we've got an example where their self-driving capabilities have found that they're not stopping for stop signs, right, as much as they need to be.
Sure.
Well, one would say they would need to always. So the thing is that the intended user, who's the person driving that car, or even the passengers, you could say is arguably an intended user. But if it's children driving in the car, they are not intended users. They were brought into the car by someone else.
Right.
If the person who might be harmed by the car going through a stop sign becomes, in a sense, an unintended victim.
Yes.
Right? And then there are people who are involved in it in all kinds of other ways, in peripheral ways. So the thing is that it can be exhaustive, and it is exhaustive to go through there's an iterative process, a repeating process. That when a person is considering the design of something, of an autonomous machine, because that's really a more appropriate term. It's autonomous intelligent systems.
Okay.
AIS. And most people don't use that term, but it really is kind of a more accurate term.
I was going to ask you this. So, and I'd love for you just to, if you could take a quick detour, because I was going to ask, when we're talking about AI today, it's important to differentiate. I've done a little bit in machine learning. I do code. Mm-hmm. I was looking at doing machine learning, and I realized I didn't have time between homeschooling my kids and running a digital marketing agency. But I do know a little bit of the different kinds. So we're not talking about like general intelligence. That's not something that you're focused on.
No, and in fact, it's something we will eventually be, and because the thing is, even with general intelligence, we're going to talk about there is design that's coming into place, right? And they are, once we get into general intelligence, then we really are talking about autonomous systems.
Right. Yeah. So for our users, users, wow, I'm already lapsing into code speak. No, for our listeners, general intelligence is that idea of what most people think of when they think of AI, which is the talking robot that passes the Turing test and can do all the human things, right?
Wow.
What we're talking about, yes, exactly. One of the more disturbing iterations, right? But the yes, iRobot, all those kind of considerations. Whereas, honestly, AI is present in our lives right now at that machine learning level, at this autonomous, level. So I just wanted to clarify that so people knew what we were talking about. Yes, phones, Netflix. Every time you get a recommendation, there's not some person sitting behind a screen somewhere. That's AI. So. And think about how often we get recommendations now. So, just to give people a little bit of that scope.
And I think that the film Social Dilemma did an extraordinarily good job of really revealing that what has happened. Right, by people's engagement, by our engagement with with autonomous intelligent systems.
Yes.
Right? Facebook, Instagram.
Yeah.
By our engagement, we are engaging with it. So people go, I don't have anything to do with AI, and you're like, well, yeah, you do. And right. So, are you using your GPS? Yeah, you do. Right. So the thing is, it's the degrees to which, and one of the reasons I find myself in a particularly good position, I don't know if good is the word, but an important position for myself in this is that I was somebody who I was not somebody who did machine learning or coding or any of those things. I was somebody who AI was like, really?
Yeah.
And it's relatively new for me. I ended up being in the right place at the right time and asking the right questions.
Yeah, and tell us a little bit about that. You told the story to me, but I think it's good for our listeners to understand it, and we'll move from there. But I think that story is very helpful.
Well, I ended up going to a conference on AI for social good. And there are some amazing things. There are AI programs, AIS programs that reduce human trafficking, that clean the oceans. There's something called the Crisis Hotline, which is posted in most schools across the country, and in fact in the U.S. and in fact has saved at this point. When I first got introduced, they had saved something like 36,000 lives. That was several years ago already. So they are using AIS as a triage system for young people who are in distress. And it is it's a combination it's a beautiful marriage of the AIS system assisting human beings who will get these people, right? Somebody who's texting in crisis. But if we're receiving hundreds and thousands of those a day, which we are.
Yes.
We
Yes.
can't staff that. It's not with qualified enough staff. So what we do, right, so what they have done, not we, but what they have done is they have a system that triages, like, these are the flags. And they know the flags in tone of a text.
Wow.
In letters used, and their accuracy is pretty high. And what happens is that initial system flags who needs to be sent to the next level. And that's going to be another system. And then eventually, very quickly, it goes to a panel of human beings who are reading these.
Yes.
And eventually responding to them, and eventually asking the person, do you want help? And they are able to then make that happen in real time. So to me, that's kind of one of the best demonstrations of AIS that I know, right?
Yes.
To me, that's like, and when I'm watching this stuff and I'm seeing it, and I was watching AIS systems. This one was amazing about controlling sounds in a hospital so that you can heal, because all those horrible beeping sounds, right?
Oh,
to kind of ameliorate that. Anyway, so those were great. The thing is, the person sitting next to me, I said, "What do you do?" And they were at IEEE. And I said, saying, "Well, we're working on AI ethics." And I said, "Well, whose ethics?"
Right.
That was the first question. And then asked a series of questions. And because I asked those kinds of questions, that's how I got invited. That plus the fact that I'm a psychologist. So I was coming from the perspective, I'm also an educational psychologist. So not just from, and it's not to belittle that, it's not to make that any smaller. It's coming from the human consideration perspective as well as a pedagogical. How are we going to teach this? Or how are we going to communicate this? So that's how I got involved. But because I was not somebody who had a previous love affair with AI, I was able to provide questions that were very valuable in the process. Yeah. I thought of AI as being like Dr. No.
Right.
Right. For anybody who's old enough to know what that is, it's like, it's kind of like, that was, it was like the evil villain who's running the big machine. So.
Kind of. I mean, I think a lot of people think of Skynet, right? Like that's the initial, Even as you're talking about an AIS handling a crisis hotline. I know some people would have that immediate reaction. I have it like, shouldn't they, if someone's in trouble, shouldn't they immediately deal with a human? But if they're texting, one, they're not going to necessarily be able to tell the difference. And what people don't realize is like, well, don't they miss some people? If humans were handling the text messaging, which to be honest, what would be more likely to happen is they would miss them because they don't have time. But then the other side of it is that humans would miss flagging the correct ones too. Right? Whereas you can continually get better with the AI and then pass on the problematic ones. Because this is the truth, is that when dealing with any kind of open phone number like that, you're going to have crank calls, right? You're going to have kids who are just like, hey, what's up? And it's like, has a small conversation with them and then maybe figure something out. And so I think just providing that kind of context, that a lot of times when we talk about the error with, so for instance, with Tesla, the stop sign thing's a big deal. And they're going to, of course, fix that. But the truth is, I can't tell you how much worse drivers have gotten in the last 10 years. I think everyone knows, right? I can't tell. I mean, if I drive 40 minutes, I guarantee you I will see at least two people with their head down, looking at their phone, just driving on the highway. And
well, it's an interesting thing. I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's an interesting thing.
No.
I just read this morning, I want to say, it was the Post or Times. They have now, there's studies coming out, because there's many psychological studies of the effects of COVID, right, and the pandemic. But that that there has been a societal effect in that vehicle accidents have risen exponentially. And one of the reasons that they're attributing it to is there's a social distancing. There's people aren't considering where somebody else is. People are not as socially, not that people were horribly socially, fantastically socially aware before, just to say, but they're less.
Yeah.
And that is, there's a detachment, a societal detachment. And that they are attributing because they've been looking at the reasons, right? Like what was happening in that accident. And they're finding that is that's a consequence, which in fact might be a place that AIS could help.
Yeah. Yeah. And I before we get too far, I did want to talk about this because you mentioned things like the social dilemma, and you talked about unintended users. And I had just seen a study presented in a YouTube video, where I think it was the Washington Post, but I could be getting it wrong. But a couple of reporters did a double-blind test on how fast to get to graphic and hate crime content on TikTok, and it's actually not very hard. And what people don't understand is you don't have time to go through every single video that's posted up. You can't compete, right? It's too big. So they rely on users reporting and on some basic AI filters that it's very difficult. Like even people mess up humor. Like to expect an AI to understand humor is like not going to work. And it was within 100 videos, which it sounds like a lot, but on TikTok, that's 1 to 2 hours. You could get to brutal anti-Semitism, graphically violent videos, and Nazi symbolism.
Well, there's also, right. The thing is, there's that, because it can become a vehicle for hate. It can become a vehicle for anything that's toxic, because people who are determined to do that are going to use any means that they can, right? And that to me is it's a faster vehicle, right?
Right. Well, and sorry, that's actually not, this is what I wanted to ask about, because I have experienced this. I have experienced a few things popping up and I'm like, oh no. And what people don't realize is how much the algorithm on TikTok drives it. That's the AI part of it. And how if you watch something because it's interesting, the algorithm thinks you want to watch more of that in a more extreme way. And so when you talk about unintended users, so I apologize for the length of this question, I guess, but it's just like, when you talk about unintended users, I think about like my oldest would look at something and be like, oh, but my youngest, anything aggressive on TV, he immediately gravitates to. He's 4. Like, if he's watching, I don't even know where he comes up with some of this stuff. Like he's watching like Doc McStuffins, and like someone pushes somebody, and his instinct is not to watch them the whole thing. Where like, we don't push. He's like, oh, I push people. Like he's geared towards aggressiveness. And I know that when we're talking about kids, which TikTok is in a lot of ways marketed at children, that curiosity got like, as an adult, we know not to watch graphically violent stuff because of what it does to us, or we should know, but like we assume responsibility for that. But as an unintended users, how do you handle kind of that curiosity from unintended users?
Well, I think that this is where the whole purpose of the education committee that we're working on now. We're focusing on engineers, because what most people don't realize, I didn't realize, I thought, of course engineers got AI ethics in school. They do not get AI ethics in school. So they will more and more, because that's now coming into the zeitgeist. So they will.
Right.
It hasn't. So the thing is, that's first. The second thing for the committee is really looking at the non-engineers who are not training in schools.
Yeah, right.
You've got
making it part of boot camps.
Right. Forget boot camps. You got a kid in the middle of the Sahara who figured out how to get on, who has now just developed 3 apps. So that's how I
learned to code.
There we go.
I didn't take a boot camp. Yeah.
Right, so how are we learning, right? How are we reaching those burgeoning engineer, self-educated engineer. I mean, that's Steve Jobs.
Right.
I mean, Steve Jobs didn't, right? And then, although he had access before that, but there are many formally educated, right, engineers.
Yes.
Then we reach business people who are producing it and mobilizing it.
Right.
Who are saying, oh, my IT people deal with that. Who are not. And then, or my legal team, who are not.
Right.
And then we begin to go to daily users who are adults, and then K through 12. I mean, it's a scaffold. This is, we have to start with the people who we know are wanting to design it in schools. The thing about where you were, I'm going to just circle back to the users or unintended users. There was another thing that just recently came. There's been several cases because now we're going to see more of them in the metaverse.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Oh.
So the metaverse, what happened recently, there were two cases. One of which was there was a woman who was a beta tester for a game. And in the game, somebody was sexually abusive to her in the game. And while she was watching the game, she was in the game in her goggles. She was in the game with her husband and her brother-in-law, who were actually even witnessing this happen until they realized what was going on, and everybody just got off. And the response, this was, I think, from Facebook. I'm almost positive. I would have to double check that. Again, I don't want to be liable, I don't want to be litigious. But the response from the producer of the game was, well, she didn't check off all those safeties she was supposed to check off. She was the beta tester. She didn't check off all those safeties. So it's blaming the victim in this, right? Blaming the target. And I try to stay away from victim talk. But they go toward the target, right?
Sure.
The thing is, we also then I think it was this week, there was a case where it's an adult game, a very much adult content game.
Got it.
Whatever it is. And somebody went, how old are you? 3 people showed up and they went, how old are you? And it was 3 kids one was 6, one was 5, and one was somewhere in that same age. And they went, and it was thank goodness, it was a responsible person who said, what are you doing in here? Because they reported it. But they were, what are you doing in here? And they said, where did you get, they went, I got my mom's goggles. Because the smart 5-year-old, the smart 6-year-old is going to do that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my son, learned the combination to the iPad without asking me. I think he was sneakily watching me, and he rented a couple videos on Amazon Prime. So now we have to watch Lego Batman at some point.
There are lots of consequences,
right?
And these are both very serious consequences, and then there are lighter consequences. But some of them feel like lighter consequences and are not so much. For example. To me, it is a big deal. We have very small children ordering an adult woman's voice around. Alexa, get me that.
Right.
Alexa, pick up my clothes. Alexa, open the door. Alexa, Siri. It's all women's voices. It's all adult women's voices.
That's the default, right? Yeah.
So, and we don't think about that. The thing is, when we go, well, what can we do about that? Well, we can. We are the consumer.
Yeah.
We are the consumer. And as a business person, any business people listening, as a business person, I guarantee that there are several things in your business that you may use that you haven't thought about those things.
Right.
And it's not saying blame, because who knew, right? I didn't know. How did I know? I haven't thought about that, right? Most people will go, I haven't even thought about that.
Yep.
So it's not about blame. It's the idea of, it's like bias, right? We all are biased. But once we learn about our bias, we go, oh, well, now I have a choice. I can either continue on that bias with that operating from that bias, or I can decide I'm going to do something else. And that's where people have gotten complacent. There's a term in called what is it? It's the I'll give it a second. It's a paradox. It's a paradoxical term. Like pleasure paradox. Anyway, I'll think of it in a second. My brain just went empty.
Go ahead and explain the concept. Maybe I can help you.
So the idea is that we push a button, even though we know it's not good. People, after watching Social Dilemma, after watching other things, go, I know I shouldn't just press accept, or I know I shouldn't do that, but we do it because it's easy. We do it because it's just easier. It just makes my life easier. Right. And so there is a lot of that, and we have gotten to be a very complacent world in a lot of ways. And then what happens is people get angry after, saying, well, so-and-so is taking advantage. And it's kind of like, well, we all do have a responsibility here. Yes. And whether we have exercised it or not, whether or not we don't, and many of us don't perceive that we have any power.
Right. When we have so much more power than we realize. Yeah.
We do. And this is where, when we talk about even introducing this into K through 12, if we can give a kid a batch of Legos and say, build a building, we can say to that kid, think about who's going to live in that building. Think about like the Sims games. Right. Or any of those. The part of the instructions is not think about the consequences to the people that right. And that could be. Yeah. Because if we really began it earlier on, we might. It's not a guarantee, because there are people who are like, yeah, human nature is going to do what human nature does. And that's true. That's true to a certain degree. Also, though, if anybody has ever met a child who has learned about recycling, they know, right? Children who learn about recycling become the recycling police.
Right. Yeah. Oh, they get so excited about it. Yeah.
And so if we can begin to learn how are we operating? What responsibility are we taking for the things that we use every day, that we do, that we buy? And especially for people, one of the reasons I love it, because I'm a leadership coach. Businesses, it's like you are contributing. Right. So however it is you're contributing. So maybe you're already doing it and it's great. And what more can you do? And knowing that just around the corner, there is going to be an exponential jump in what we use. Right. I mean, we're going to see a huge difference between fake Facebook accounts and fake metaverse accounts, right? Those are two very different things. Something you said, you were talking about the woman's voice, and immediately what I thought of was, because I've been part of these discussions at a lower level in marketing, is that decision was not made based on should we have a woman's voice. That decision was made. They did about 10 to 20 different voices, and they had customers listen to it, and then they said which one made the customer engage more, which one made the customer happier, without any regard to what are the ethics of using this particular voice. And so just getting people to understand that, to introduce that ethical element is like, is this just because everyone likes it, or because this draws more people in, is it the right thing to do? I mean, it's like the infinite scrolling thing. Everyone's switching over to it because it's effective, right? I mean, that's slightly different from AI, but it's all these different decisions that are made
by effectiveness and what they run into. And you said this about the exponential thing, and this is where I'm curious what the solution is here, because the people who do based on marketing might actually beat out people who do things ethically because it's more about bringing people in. Does that make sense?
I think it does. I think that I refer to myself as a dedicated optimist.
Sure.
I really am. Philosophically,
yeah.
I'm a dedicated optimist, and I'm not fond of I'm also not fond of the positive toxicity world of positivity where it's all rosy.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. No, I mean, to me, that is actually, it requires denial, right? That requires a certain level of denial. I understand that if I dumped in the middle of the ocean during a tsunami, it's probably not so good.
Yeah. Fair point.
Right. But if I'm going to look for, if I can find, because I'm going to believe that I'm going to find a piece of wood that I can hold on to, and then I'm going to get to that shore somehow, or I'm going to get to some place where I can be safe, because that, to me, that's dedicated optimism. It's like,
right, you got to try your best. Yeah,
I know I'm in the quicksand. And right, what am I going to do? So I believe very much there is a place where it will meet.
Okay.
I believe it's not will, can. I believe
yes.
To me, I feel like, I've learned over the years from teaching and from public speaking, it's always about the invitation. It always comes down to the invitation. And it's rather than a demand. I mean, I can say, and I can pretty clearly say, and, I believe that we really need to do this. Simultaneously, I can tell anybody that they need to do something. They're probably not going to. So, right? So that's just that's human psychology. So that's human nature. So not just psychology, right? It's on a lot of levels. But the idea that people really can be invited to their best selves.
Yes. Yeah.
And I also believe that there's more best self than worst self in the world. I know it doesn't feel like that a lot of times, but if I believed otherwise, I don't know if I'd get up in the morning. So, right?
Right. And I love this answer, by the way. Yeah. Right. And I think it's key.
Yeah, and I have a daughter, right? My daughter's 22 years old. She's got her whole life in front of her, and her friends and all the children I've and I don't even want to call them children, but they are all the young people I've taught over the years. I've had a career for 4 decades, so it's like a lot of them are fully adults. But I want them to flourish. I want them to live a life and do those things. So to me, my time is better spent. Not in denial, but in saying, okay, where are the cracks?
Yeah.
How can we heal? How can we look for what the cracks are telling us?
Right. What's under stress?
Right. And what do we need to get rid of? Because there are some things we need to just get rid of, right? That's like sometimes the foundation is rotten. So you get rid of the foundation. And sometimes the cracks are just things that tell us what needs to get filled in, right? So
right.
I can be very metaphoric with this, but I really believe that human beings can do this. And in fact, it's the way of the future. This is what, in the Presencing Institute, the MIT's Presencing Institute, Otto Scharmer, they talk a lot about the emergence, right? The emerging future. We're in the emerging future. It's not like the future's over there. We're in it right now.
Yeah.
Right. And so what will we do with this emerging future? I mean, I often think about my mother and my father. My mother was born in 1918. My father was born in 1909. And at 95 years old, watching my mother sit there with an iPad in her hand, going, looking at me like, you gotta be kidding me.
It's crazy. No, it really is. Yeah.
In her lifetime,
yeah,
they went from taking a battery out of a car and putting it into the radio in the house so that you could listen to a radio and taking it back out of the radio to put it into the car. That happened in one person's lifetime.
Right.
Star Trek is happening. She was on the iPad having a FaceTime conversation with my daughter.
Right.
And I'm looking at her and she's looking at me like, what are you? And she thought it was great.
Yeah.
She thought it was great. And she was also sitting there going, and that's going to happen again. I use the word exponential a lot because I think we're just going to keep having these huge leaps. You know, the time it took to go from radio to having a phone in the neighborhood to having a phone in your house. Right?
To having a phone in your hand. Yeah.
So, right, all of those things, each one of these things is going to keep jumping.
Yeah.
And which means that we will need to. We will. I mean, I really try to stay away from the need, but it's like I invite people. It's like, consider.
Right.
We need a little, we can be that flexible. We can be. We may not feel like it, but we can be that flexible. And I think the education is part of what, to me, at least for me, and I think this is, I invite people to consider what I've learned from my own life. I think that's all we can do, right? Is by learning. I knew nothing about AI, but by learning about it and really learning, because I went into the deep dive. I went into the deep end of the pool. But by really learning about it, I had a completely different experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sorry. No.
First off, and I didn't mean to cut you off in the middle of that. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Such an optimistic answer, and I appreciate that. And my original question wasn't meant to be negative. It was just like, it's an obvious crack, right? It's like one of those things that we're like looking at, like how do we deal with this?
I didn't view it as negative in any way, actually.
Yeah. Okay, good. I love that optimism.
I viewed it as being, that is our primal human response. That's my primal human response, right? When I first went, it was like, when I first got invited, and it was like, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you just have to ask, like, okay, this is definitely a problem we have to fix, because you do get a competitive advantage. You know, I think of the psalmist saying, why do the wicked prosper? You know, it's like, why do the people who are not caring about what the consequences are advancing? And that's not always the case. You know, we have examples of people who are making clear, but we have to make that concerted effort. And I think a lot of this, that discussion of acceleration, that discussion of how it's going to be exponentially more. I mean, I remember getting a Facebook account when you had to have a .edu email address, right? And that was 15 years ago. And now Facebook is a dominant force in many people's lives. I'd say the majority of people's lives, you know, and it's such and that is an AI thing, right? It's the algorithm makes a big difference in people's lives. Little tweaks. Google, very similar. What people search and what comes up, and they make real decisions and ethical decisions. And I think that's where, if I could ask you, you know, to go in this direction, you had that initial question that in many ways led to you getting this position. Whose ethics? How do we find that ethic? And how do we find an ethic that works for the common good, but also establishes common ground? So it's not just like someone's ethic that, hey, it does work for everybody, but it's one that everyone agrees works for everybody, which isn't always the same thing.
No, and I thank you for that, and thanks for redirecting us there, because that's really a huge part of the work of the committee, is, well, because it's an international committee.
Yeah.
Right. So we've got people in Israel, people in Dubai, people in Africa, people in Japan, we've got people all over the world who are in this committee. Considering just that, because we're not only, when we begin to consider ethics, we have to consider governance. We have to consider regulations. Whose regulations? Because if we're talking about human rights even, what does human rights mean in Russia? What does human rights mean here? What does human rights mean in China? What does human rights mean in South America, depending on which place in South America?
Yeah.
Right? What does human rights mean in Africa, depending on which place in Africa? So, right?
I mean, even in America, you
yes,
have
yes.
it's a volatile
ethics,
subject.
Yes. So when we're just, as you know, as a philosopher, discussing ethics is always right. It's a movable feast.
It's the easiest type of discussion. Always, yeah. No one ever gets heated.
No. Yeah, right. It's a movable feast. So the thing is, what a big part of what for one of the tenets that we're using, because you have to use through lines, right? One of the through lines, or I call it a through line, is sustainable development, which was not initially an original part of the committee, but now is more and more, because it becomes evident that if you're beginning to discuss human rights, right, if you're going to talk about like the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals for the UN, right, human rights are part of that. And so...
You would hope so, yes.
Right. And equity and equitable behavior and those things should be part of ethics. One would hope.
Yes. Right.
Not assume, but hope. And then we begin, to me, it almost becomes a, one of the challenges is not getting lost in the swamp so much of debating which one to choose, but which ones we can start with, which ones we can agree on, right? Those are like collaborative agreements, right? So in my work as a leadership coach, right, that's one of the things I spend a lot of time doing. People start with what we don't want. It's like, forget what we don't want. Start with what we want, right?
Yeah.
And let's build from there. And so, part of our work has been gathering first of all, what does AI mean in different places to different people? Because it means different things in different places to different people, just FYI. And then, and that's globally, right? So we've got all the different, right? Considering all these definitions, we are going to use, right? Now we're going to come up with our operational definition, because we have to find a common language and semantics. And then we begin to look at ethics in the same way. How can we find commonalities to begin with? We know that this is a big part of the work of the World Economic Forum, and we know it's right. Those are the the UN, UNESCO, those are all the big organizations. There are big, huge meetings about this at places like The Hague, where they're really debating how can we find commonality, so that we can find some way to regulate this runaway train, what feels like a runaway train sometimes.
Right.
So it constantly goes back to whose ethics. Okay, we said this at this meeting. All right, and anybody else have, right? And then somebody else is going to come in. And we go, all right, well, we're going to consider that. Everybody's going to consider that. We're going to see what we can come up with that is as common a goal, right?
Right.
And present that as us understanding that we're also in development on this, because there's no final expert. I mean, there are people like Stephen A. Baraki, who is arguably one of the biggest experts in the field. But even he would say that, there are dozens of organizations working on this. And it's, IEEE is one, and it's huge, but there are many organizations working on this, and really wonderful people. That's one of the other things I try to tell people when they get very depressed about it. It's kind of like, there's actually a lot of people working on this.
Yeah. Yeah. So, working very hard. Yes.
But I love the question of whose ethics, and that is one we have to continually come back to. Because also something that I might have thought ethical was ethical yesterday. How are we seeing it now, right?
Yeah.
And we know
as new information comes in, as blind spots are revealed. I'm sorry, continue.
No, well, the thing is, and we know this like in biomedical AI, right? So the things that are saving people's lives can also be used nefariously. So what are things...
Can you give me an example of that? I'm sorry, I can't think of one off the top of my head, but maybe I don't want to know, but still.
Well, we can do gene editing. Gene editing could save a child's life.
Yeah.
And gene editing could also do some really messed up stuff.
Right.
There are many.
Yes. I think it's Francis Fukuyama. I read his book on, this idea of we could end up in a world, if we're not careful, where rich people are literally editing their kids to be more advanced at different things than imagine the poor and rich divide, but at a genetic level. Right, because they have access to these technologies.
And there's a whole argument about transhumanism, which I will not go into today, because transhumanism, the thing is, transhumanism is a whole thing. That's like Martine Rothblatt's work, which is amazing. Yeah. Martine was she was the inventor of Sirius SX, or the founder of Sirius SX.
Right.
But, and Hanson Robotics that does amazing stuff.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of different people who are moving in a direction of transhumanism that is a whole...
What, you don't have another 2 hours?
It's also, it really, then we really, there's so many belief systems that come into play.
Right.
And now you cross over into religion. You cross over, right? You cross it. There's a lot of
so many
there.
Metaphysical questions. Yes.
Right. So we can pull that down. But and I think it's really fascinating. My reaction used to be, oh my God, no. And now I go, what do I think about that? Because it's changing. What I believe is changing. What I think is changing. What I value has not, in many ways. Right. My values are kind of embedded in my beliefs in different places. Although I have some values have risen higher to the top.
Right.
But I think that this question of whether it is ethical is what we want. I really wish we could get more people talking about all the time. I mean, I know that's like every philosopher's dream, is to have a world where people go, what do I think about that? What do we think about that? Because
I mean, that's why I'm having you here on the show, right? I mean, that's why I'm doing this show. I think it's, I wanted to talk about this just so that people start asking these questions. So thank you again for coming on. I mean, I just think this is so essential.
Oh, and I know, well, this is also how it works. You know, how you have brain lateral slides. It's the privacy paradox. When I was talking before about the paradox, I have lateral slides.
Yeah. So, but people wanting to press the button.
People wanting to press the button and give up their privacy.
Yeah.
And if you said, "Do you know you gave up your privacy?" they would say yes. If they were being honest, they would say yes.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But I did it because it was kind of easier. Right now.
I wanted the article, so I accepted all the cookies. All the cookies.
The thing is, I've done it. We've all done it. And I think when we can take, we can kind of take the finger pointing out of it, and we can take right, blame out of it and start saying, okay, we all do it. Now what do we want to do, right? If we know that we're all dumping garbage in the street and that the streets are becoming unlivable, I know we've all been doing it, but do we really want to be doing that, or do we want to make a change, right? And I think that people, when invited to their best selves, again, I know it's very optimistic of me, but I really believe that can, not always will, but can change. I think people can, and maybe it's not even a change. Maybe it was there all along. They just it wasn't rising to the surface.
This reminds me so much. I just had a conversation with Dr. Lewis Gordon a week ago, and we were talking about his book, Fear of Black Consciousness, and it's on racism. But the solution was very similar. Your discussion of it is of these difficult societal problems that we don't know how to wrestle with is very similar. And it was one, just committing to a better future is really important. And so being and that's the way he talked about it, was committing to the future. For you say dedicated optimist, but it's very similar. And the idea of opening up possibilities and not just shutting things down. And so when you're faced with a difficult question, opening up possibilities and inviting people to be better. I mean, he talked about, he was a professor in Indiana, and he would walk in, and he was often the first Black person this is that many of the students had seen, and some students would immediately walk out, but some students would stay, and they would talk to him, and they'd say, "Wow, I've never talked to a Black person before. I thought it was supposed to go like this, but it's going like this." And so it's not will, but it can. And if you get enough you can solve these problems in meaningful ways. Yeah. Not completely, not perfectly, but in meaningful ways.
Well, and I'm sorry to interrupt, it's funny that you mentioned that, because so much of my training was in doing social equity and racial equity trainings. I used to facilitate those.
Right.
And that was where I learned better skills at having ethical conversation, because that's what it comes. Those kinds of conversations, when we're talking about our biases, when we're talking about our stereotypes, fears, the way our brains and our hearts operate, people come. There's so much defensiveness because people are terrified they'll be wrong.
Right.
What happens if we were wrong? Well,
that's actually, it's so interesting. I have grown a lot in my own life, grew up independent, fundamental Baptist Christian, right? It was very exciting. Should women be able to wear pants, right? This was like a real discussion that adults had. And it's just now looking back, in Wisconsin in negative 20-degree weather, are you serious? Of course they should be able to wear pants.
I'm also from Wisconsin.
It's cold.
It is cold.
Yes. But at the end of the day, learn to ask, to present them with the future. It's would you rather continue to be wrong just so you don't have to admit it, or would you rather just be part of the change and start doing doing what you really have started to realize is right?
Well, and there are so many layers to this, because part of it is philosophical, right, and cerebral, and so much of it is emotional. So much of it is both emotional and a societal tendency in the West toward a kind of a punitive, it's that very kind of it's very mea culpa, right? I'm going to beat myself for having been a part of something that was awful. It's like we've all participated in something that's awful. When people go, well, I've never bullied anyone, you go, you know what? I'll bet your sisters probably would argue with that. Right? So The thing is, none of us are angels, although my mother would have argued that she was a saint. The fact is that none of us are angels. And none of us also, I mean, I also have been a trainer for what's called social emotional learning in schools and in businesses. And I always say, no one gets a certificate of completion in social emotional learning. It's like, oh, I'm finished, right? No, right? We're not finished. We're not finished being a better person, because what is social emotional intelligence? It's self-awareness, the ability to regulate ourselves, the ability to relate with others and handle conflicts, the ability to make good decisions, or not to make careful decisions or responsible decisions. If anybody tells me they're finished with all of those things, I'd like to know who they are. Because, yeah. I mean, really, who? I mean, because it's an ongoing thing. I very often will say, so many people have had. I've done a lot of trainings during the pandemic, and one of the things when I talk to people about when we reflect on what were you like before and what are you like now, and one of the most common, not the only one, but one of the most common reflections is I've really become a more patient person. And that was something that happened probably not because people thought, oh, I really want to become a patient person. It happened because guess what? You can't go anywhere. You can't do anything. I'm sorry. Right?
Right.
I know it really sucks, and as a result, not everyone, but a lot more people found that in themselves. And that's the development of a skill. Now, when things speed up, they may say, well, that was then, this is now, right? And so it's not a one time, like I learned it once and now I'm going to be great at it forever. And I think and coming back to AI and AI ethics, coming from that, I know it's a cliche, but the lifelong learning perspective, coming from this perspective, I mean, I'm like the poster child. I keep going back to school. But this lifelong learning of, what am I learning about myself? What am I learning about the world? What am I learning with how I interact with the world and things in the world? Because what autonomous systems are more than simply things. They carry much more. They carry many more consequences.
Right.
Right. And so the student who used to bully in the hall, or the bully behavior, right, in the hallway, now has a tool that they can use and be infinitely more damaging. And so, right, when we begin to think about how this escalates, going back to that, you were talking about escalation before. That's when we can say, okay, things are faster.
Yeah.
So what do I have to do differently? Right? What do we have to do differently? And I know it's not, but if people are like, no, I want it done yesterday, or I want somebody else to do it for me. And I would just like to invite them, again, the invitation, I'd like to invite us all, and not them, us all, myself included, right? Did I think about pushing that button?
Yeah, and it's we push so many buttons throughout the day, and we just don't even think about it, right? And I love that kind of as like a summary of what we've been talking about. As we kind of wrap up here, one, thank you. Two, if as a listener you've been enjoying this, please like, share, and subscribe so that more people can hear this discussion, because I think this is so important. As we close out here, besides your own work, which obviously I think would be a good place to start with some of this, what would you recommend? Is there a book, a lecture, a video, a movie that you'd say is a great place for people to learn more about AI ethics?
Yeah, absolutely. There are many courses online right now. Coursera has a couple of them, a number of the other, there are many, and burgeoning. There are a lot of them. I would say look on LinkedIn.
Okay.
I mean, if it's business people, look on, even if it's not business people, but look on LinkedIn, look, under AI ethics, Google AI ethics and classes, or, right? Because, and then
seems like a conflict of interest, but
well, it is. The thing is,
it's okay.
It could be, but it's also it's really it's really important that we begin to do this. And there are there is a whole list of books, which actually what I will do rather than cite them all right now, because there's I tend to do that, which is only interesting to me. So what I will do is I will give you that if you want, you could put into the notes for the show.
Absolutely. I will put that list.
Right, because there's a long list of books that are really beginning, and new reports that are coming out, more importantly, reports that are coming out that are really beginning to bring this idea to the front. Because even in small businesses, even if you have 2 employees, 3 employees, right, it's really an important thing. And it's certainly important for us to think about in our families.
Oh, yes, absolutely. As you're talking about, whether we have the decision to make the default voice, we do have the decision to change it, right? I think that most of the, just to go with a small example like that, to think about it.
Right, or even to say, did you ask Siri nicely?
Yeah.
So there's so many options, because right? Am I speaking to Sarah? Am I speaking to Siri sarcastically? Am I speaking to Siri in a bossy voice? Am I speaking to Siri? I mean, one of my favorite things I think ever was years ago when Siri first started, and I yelled about something. And she went, I don't appreciate that. And it made me laugh so hard. I loved it.
Yeah.
But I think, and I don't know if they have removed that even now from those. But I think really important, or if you're using those, did you check your privacy settings? Right? What are your privacy settings on? Right? Because, really.
Yeah.
So anyway, those are things that we can do. I don't want people to get, I worry about people getting paranoid, like to step away from paranoia with it. We'll all do the best that we can do, right? We're all doing the best we can do. But, a little increase in consciousness goes a long way.
It's very true. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
It's such a pleasure, PJ. Thank you so much.